I want to take you on a trip to the past. Close your eyes and imagine that it is November 27th of 2021. Depending on when you woke up, when you ate breakfast, and whatever else you're doing, you're now imagining yourself sitting in front of the TV, and it's just a few minutes or a few hours before kickoff between the Michigan Wolverines and the Ohio State Buckeyes. What were you thinking about that game? Who did you think was going to win? Did you think that Michigan was going to get it done, or were you a part of the mass of people that expected this to be another competitive game, more competitive than the Ohio State-Michigan matchups in recent memory, but that the Buckeyes, like always, or so it seemed, would prevail, march on to what would be, at that point, a fifth consecutive Big Ten championship, and another college football playoff appearance, and potentially Ryan Day's first national championship? What were you thinking? Tell me down below. And I'll tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking that Georgia and Ohio State were on a collision course. Georgia in the regular season and before Alabama did to the Bulldogs what they did to them in the SEC championship game occurred, Georgia looked unstoppable. They were in a tier of their own. Their passing offense at times looked suspect, but that ground attack and that suffocating defense, no one could compete with it. Until November of 2021, when after struggling for the first few games of the season, Ohio State began to put the pieces of their offense together. Stroud looked like the best quarterback in the country. Henderson was awesome at running back as a true freshman. The offensive line was improving. The wide receiver core with Smith and Jigba, Chris Olave, and Garrett Wilson was the best in the country. Jeremy Ruckert was a good tight end. And the defense, slowly but surely, was finding itself capable of limiting good offenses. Ohio State blew out Purdue and Michigan State in back-to-back weeks before coming to Ann Arbor. And I, as a Michigan fan who in the preseason didn't think that Michigan would enter the game with a 10-1 record, I was higher on them in the preseason than most were. I didn't think that they could get it done. Ohio State was also 10-1, except they were 8-0 in conference, while Michigan was 7-1 in conference. And I thought that Ohio State was clearly the second best team in the country. And in retrospect, with hindsight, if they had beaten Michigan, won the Big Ten championship game, and played Georgia in the Orange Bowl, there's a good chance that we're talking about that team with that defense, the defense that all you Buckeye fans loathe, that team wins it all. 2021 was a down year, and just like how Bryce Young and John Mechie and Jamison Williams matched up well with that Georgia defense, C.J. Stroud and his receiver core matched up just as well, if not better. There's a chance they could have beaten Georgia and won it all. Another what-if season for Ohio State. And the matchups, the talent advantage, the history, all of what caused Ohio State to be favored by nearly double digits on the road against Michigan, that's where the fun ends. Michigan won 42-27 in a game that I couldn't believe I was watching. They ran for nearly 300 yards, averaged over 7 yards per carry, and had 6 rushing touchdowns. Instead, they went to Indianapolis for the first time ever. They had never played in the Big Ten championship game before, and they got blown out by Georgia in the Orange Bowl. But it was a great season, and it won Jim Harbaugh job security. It won him faith from the fan base. It even won him a little bit of interest from the NFL, where he is now. The reason I am telling you this is because at the time, I couldn't believe it. Buckeye fans couldn't believe it. Michigan fans couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. There were a handful of people that actually picked Michigan to win the game. A famous Michigan State fan and local radio host in Detroit, Mike Valeni, picked Michigan to win, and people thought he was asinine. His reasons helped me accurately predict that Michigan would cover the spread, but I didn't have enough faith to believe that Michigan would win, and they did. The effect the cause for why Michigan beat Ohio State is they were the more physical team. They had the better defense. They had the better offensive line. They had the better running back room. The only areas that season in which Ohio State was overall the better team were quarterback and wide receiver. That was it. Maybe corner, as Denzel Burke was also awesome as a true freshman, just like Travion Henderson, when healthy at least. The cornerback room in that year for Ohio State was really good. But Michigan was deeper. They were better in the trenches. They had better defense. And with home field advantage, well, that's that. But the following season in 2022, people didn't believe in Michigan either, especially with Blake Corum being injured. And it didn't matter. Michigan was still the more physical team. They had the better defense. Their offense, in fact, outplayed Ohio State's in that game. And instead of winning by 15 in their home court like they did in 2021, they won by 22 on the road in Columbus. It was the first time that Michigan beat Ohio State in Columbus since the year 2000. That was before I was born. Before I was born was the second to last time in the present day that Michigan had beaten Ohio State on the road. And then we get to 2023. And the cause of Michigan beating Ohio State had now been constant for 2 years in a row. But the effect only came forward in the 2023 preseason when beat writers, when analysts, and when the majority of all fan bases, including a lot of Ohio State fans, picked Michigan to just outright win the Big Ten and at least play for a national championship against Georgia in the 2023 preseason. Finally, people had come to respect Michigan football. They came to realize that the rivalry is back. It's no longer one-sided for Ohio State. Then the cheating scandal comes out, and most of that faith regresses, and understandably so. The question is how much of Michigan's wins in 21 and 22 were actually theirs? Fair question. Michigan beat Penn State. A little bit of that faith is restored. But Ohio State in 2023 began to peak. The run game, which had struggled all season with a healthy Henderson, began to improve, began to peak, began to really climb up the hill and get really good at it, especially with big runs. The wide receiver core, with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Igbuka being healthier than he was in October, was very functional. Kyle McCord at times looked like he could be an efficient passer. They didn't have the same murderer's row of a schedule like they did in 2021 where they played ranked Purdue and ranked Michigan State back-to-back. This time Ohio State played a Michigan State Minnesota team that finished the year with a losing record back-to-back. But they looked impressive, and this time, unlike 2021, they had a defense. A defense that led the nation for most of the year in passer rating and passer efficiency allowed per game. And a defense that spent the entirety of the season in the top 25 in rushing yards allowed per game. The majority of the public bet Ohio State to cover. Many picked Ohio State to win, particularly after the cheating scandal, and Michigan won 30-24. Michigan now has won the rivalry, the game, 3 years in a row. And 6 plus 15, 21 plus 22 from 2022. Michigan over the past 3 years has had a 43-point advantage over the Buckeyes. 43 points. And you divide that by 3, and Michigan on average has beaten Ohio State by just over 2 touchdowns per game in their 3 matchups over the past 3 seasons. We now enter a year where Michigan and Ohio State can play each other not just twice, because divisions are abolished and the best 2 teams make it to Indy, but because of the expanded playoff, it's ever more likely that they can meet up in the college football playoff, which they could have met up in 2022 had they both won their semifinal games. I thought they would meet up for the national championship in 23, but was proven wrong because other conferences exceeded my expectations, fielded better championships, fielded several teams with 1 or fewer losses at the end of the regular season, and the loser of the game would have just been crowded out regardless. You would have had to change other results of other games to get Ohio State and Michigan to rematch for a national title or even in a semifinal game last season. But the Buckeyes and Wolverines can meet up 3 times, and it's more likely than ever that they can meet up twice. Michigan lost Jim Harbaugh to the NFL, and they lost most of their staff and most of their roster to the NFL as well. Ryan Day made some staff adjustments, brought in Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator, and has had a heck of a preseason, bringing in Julian Sayin, Quinshon Judkins, a great tight end from Ohio whose name that I can't necessarily, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it 100%. I think it's Will Kasmerick. They brought in Seth McLaughlin, center from Alabama, who struggled against Michigan in the Rose Bowl, but so far has appeared to be okay in the spring. They brought in Caleb Downs from Alabama, freshman All-American, and they have just had they've had a heck of a preseason, really. They have. There right now is a belief that Ohio State's finally going to get it done against Michigan this year. Just like there was that same faith in 22, that same faith in 23 in the week leading up to the game after Michigan struggled against Maryland, compounding with the cheating scandal, and Ohio State looking pretty good against Minnesota, especially in the second half. And that same faith that was showcased in 2021. Ohio State, once again, is in the spotlight. The pressure is on them. The expectation is that they will beat Michigan. So, before we dive any deeper, what do you think? Do you think that the Wolverines will get it done for the 4th year in a row? Or do you think that the Ohio State Buckeyes are finally going to fulfill a preseason or at least pre-game expectation? I know in 2023, the Wolverines in the preseason were largely picked to beat Ohio State. And that's what made the 2023 season so exciting, is there were so many good teams. So many good teams. There's a video that I'm making soon that I'm excited to show you all that actually proves my opinion that 2023 may have been a down year wrong. 2023 was one of the strongest years in the 4-team college football playoff. There was no greatest of all time caliber team in 2023. But there were multiple elite teams in that next tier down below, GOAT tier. There were several elite teams in 2023. Michigan and Ohio State, I think, in the regular season belonging to said tier. That's why the narrative changed. There are a variety of things, not just the cheating scandal for Michigan, but also the fact that both teams were 11-0 entering the game, and neither team was GOAT status. They didn't control all of their opponents in 11 games. Ohio State and Michigan both at times had their struggles, or moments where at least their box scores didn't look dominant. But that's the beauty of all of this. And I'm ranting and I'm rambling on about this, but the game is beautiful. It's the best rivalry in all of college sports. And I think now more than ever, that's absolutely apparent. But welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam. Please let me know what you were thinking on that morning leading up to the 2021 edition of the game. And let me know who you think is going to win the annual Michigan versus Ohio State showdown this season. Before we dive any deeper, this is a great moment to let you know to hit the like button, to subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more college football content. Thank you so much to my patrons for sponsoring this channel and this video. If you want to get access to occasional bonus content and also be featured at typically the beginning of the video. I know the introduction took a long time, but that was very intentional. And also at the end with a shout out. You can check out my Patreon page and sign up as an all-conference, all-American, or Heisman member. Only Heisman and all-conference members get the bonus content, however. You can also support the channel via my merchandise store, making a purchase on a Big Ten team-themed College Football with Sam t-shirt or other College Football with Sam merchandise. You can find the links to my Patreon and merchandise store via the links in the description or the pinned comment. And again, like this video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. And share this video around if you have the opportunity to do so. Thank you all so much, and let's get back to business. And first and foremost, I want to talk about Ohio State and Michigan as teams, as sole teams by themselves. Then I want to talk about what I think, what advantages these rosters and coaching staffs have. Ohio State entering this season has tremendous amount of momentum and a tremendous amount of firepower and of roster retention and experience. They also have a tremendous amount of rage and pressure applied to them. Yeah, I don't think Ryan Day will lose his job if he goes 11-1 in the regular season with a loss to Michigan, but the fan base will want his head. Right now, it's do or die for Ohio State beating Michigan. Not in the same way that it probably was for Jim Harbaugh in 2021, where he had to earn that win to keep his job. And that's because Ryan Day, unlike Jim Harbaugh, has never had a season with 3 losses or more. The most losses Ryan Day has suffered in a season is 2. He has been, how do I even put this? He's lost 2 games. That's simple. I was trying to find a complex way to say that he's lost 2 games in the 2021, 2022, and 2023 seasons, losing 1 game each in the 2019 and 2020 season. 11-2 is his worst year. His worst. And yet he is under tremendous pressure. People are actually calling for this guy's head. It makes absolutely no sense, but it is what it is. And as I mentioned in yesterday's video, ESPN actually has the audacity to rank him as the 10th best head coach in college football, which is stupid. He's a top 5 head coach. Argue with me for your life, you will not win. Unless it's based off of speculation, which we don't even know if you or I will be right in terms of speculation. But even taking all speculation aside, Day's a top 5 head coach in college football right now. He recruits at an elite level. He develops at certain positions at an elite level. At least he historically has, like at his main position, which is quarterback. And I thought that if Kyle McCord returned for this year, he could have become not an elite high ceiling quarterback, but that he could have been much better than he was last year. He didn't think so, or at least he wanted some kind of guarantee that Day wasn't going to offer him, so he left for Syracuse. Enter now a quarterback room that has Will Howard, Devin Brown, Julian Sayin, Aaron Noland, and Lincoln Keenholz. It's probably the deepest quarterback room in the country. Now, as we'll get to in a few minutes, I do have some concerns about the ceiling of the quarterback room in terms of passing, at least for the likely 2 starters, being Devin Brown and Will Howard. Brown, he just needs to get healthier, needs to stay healthy, and Will Howard is not exactly known as a world beater in terms of accurate passing. But they're good quarterbacks, and they're going to be well coached, especially with Chip Kelly now commanding the offense and Day no longer calling plays. That's Chip Kelly's job now, is the game day play caller. Day, I expect, obviously will have some influence and will plan for his opponents in the week leading up to the Buckeyes games, and he'll have a hand in the offense in that time. But Kelly will be the man to call the plays on game day. There's a lot of questions about Ohio State entering this year, which is strange given the fact that most, if not all, of their important defensive players return outside of linebacker Tommy Eichenberg. They offensively return the majority of their O-line. Henderson is back at running back, and last season he was one of the best running backs in the country when healthy. Quinshon Judkins transfers in, and the wide receiver room, you lose Marvin Harrison Jr. and Julian Fleming, but Jeremiah Smith has an elite NFL-level ceiling. Emeka Egbuka is a future NFL receiver, and Carnell Tate also has a high ceiling too. And don't forget about Brandon Innes. They have a plethora of talent there. The questions are relating to what Ohio State will do with that talent. And can they beat Michigan with that talent? Can they win the national championship? They absolutely can. It's just a question of if or will they do it, which is something that Josh Pate always says. And it might be cliche at times, but that's because it's true, and it bears mentioning. It's just like with James Franklin. James Franklin can win the Big Ten. The question is, will he? But that's a topic for another video. And right now we're talking about the game. We're talking about a rivalry, one that's much bigger than the one between Penn State and Michigan, or Ohio State and Penn State. And Michigan and Ohio State are on a different level than Penn State right now in terms of program potential and program tier. Both have won national championships in the college football playoff era. Both have competed for national championships in the college football playoff era. Sharon Moore has been a part of a staff that's won a national championship, and he was the acting head coach in 4 games for Michigan last year. And Ryan Day has played for a national, or coached for a national championship, rather, against Alabama in 2020. The Buckeyes are 70th in returning production, and they're second in preseason S&P Plus ratings. They're only behind Georgia in SP Plus. They're 70th in returning production, but that's mostly because Kyle McCord and Marvin Harrison Jr. are gone. And they took up a big chunk of total yards and total touchdowns and total plays, total snaps for the Ohio State Buckeyes last season. Also, keep in mind that this number is somewhat skewed because Mayan Williams and Chip Trayanum had to play a lot last year when Henderson was held out for a few games, and also early in the season when the staff was trying to decide who was the better running back between the three. At different points, it looked like Trayanum might be the best fit at running back for the Buckeyes. By the end of the year, it was clearly Henderson, outside of power capabilities, in which you'd take Trayanum any day. Just look at what he did against Michigan for a drive. And now he's at Kentucky. So there is somewhat of a deceitful layer going on. I mean, you could make an argument that Ohio State, when adjusting for injuries and adjusting for outgoing transfers in which their backups would probably do the same job, like let's say Carnell Tate over Julian Fleming, or Devin Brown filling in for Kyle McCord, then their returning production, maybe their real returning production, let's call it that, is higher. But they aren't top 10, they're not top 20, they're not top 5 like Michigan was entering last season. And the offensive line wasn't a world beater last year. The defense, I think more so because of schematics rather than on-the-field talent, at times still struggled against the run. And were also overly conservative at different moments. They do lose parts of their staff as well, and obviously parts of their roster, as does any team that produces at the level that Ohio State does. But they're largely very similar to last year. Like as a team, you have JT Tuimoloau returning. You have Jack Sawyer coming back. Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton return at defensive tackle. Denzel Burke returns. Could have been a first-round corner for the 2024 NFL Draft, but chose to come back. Lathan Ransom comes back. Davison Igbinosun and Jordan Hancock make a return. On the offensive line, all players except for guard, who's the opposite of Donovan Jackson. Forget his name. Just very briefly forget his name. But Donovan Jackson comes back, so do Josh Fryer, Josh Simmons, and Carson Hinsman. That one offensive line who is departing is Matthew Jones, of course, who, according to PFF, according to the Big Ten Awards at the end of the year, was the worst of the 2 starting guards. Still a good guard, but Donovan Jackson has a higher ceiling, higher draft profile. He could have left and gotten drafted rather high, but instead he chose to return for a chance to win a championship, both Big Ten, national, and also win a pair of gold pants against Michigan. Seth McLaughlin transfers in at center. Cade Stover leaves at tight end, but Will Kakmarek transfers in from Ohio at tight end. And at wide receiver, Emeka Egbuka is a familiar face. So this offense and defense are loaded with proven talent, both from the portal and from returning starters. And Ohio State's recruited well. And particularly this season, they have used the portal. They have worked the portal. Ohio State is viewed as a team that is on the edge, on the precipice of winning a national championship. The tier system in college football right now entering 2024, as I see it, and more so as others see it, is Georgia and Ohio State. That is tier 1. Maybe you could put Oregon and Texas in that tier, but I don't think so. I think it's Georgia and Ohio State from what I see nationally and both from what I think as well. Then you have a little bit of a drop-off. I personally am more inclined to say that Georgia is in a tier of their own, but they also do have some questions, and I don't think any team this year will be the caliber of team that Michigan was last year, that Georgia was the 2 years before that, or certainly not the caliber of team that Alabama or LSU were in 2020 or 2019, and heck, throw in 2019 Ohio State into that mix. I mean, that was a GOAT team that just didn't win a national championship. That team would beat several national champions. It's just college football was very strong that year, and Day's inexperience as a head coach caught up to him in the Fiesta Bowl against Clemson. Ohio State will be favored to win every game in the regular season, barring some disaster or massive underperformance. I'm very confident in that. The strengths of this team are elite running back, wide receiver, defensive tackle, cornerback, and safety groups. And that is largely backed up by evidence, returning production, and performance last season. And performances in other seasons where Ohio State has had a similar level of talent and potential on both the roster and coaching staff. They have high potential at quarterback, offensive guard, with Donovan Jackson coming back. I love Donovan Jackson. And at defensive end as well, with Tui Mo'olau and Sawyer returning. And at linebacker, you have a battle between C.J. Hicks and Sonny Styles at will linebacker. And Cody Simon will be starting there as well. Nice blend of experience and an elite ceiling there. Now, I mentioned several minutes before that I had some questions at quarterback in terms of potential in the passing game. That's because Will Howard and Devin Brown are in the running for the starting job. There is a feeling that I have, and I'm not going to go further on this until after the spring game and until I do more research on Ohio State's spring practices, spring preseason, and also fall camp. There is a part of me that wonders if Julian Sayin maximizes Ohio State's potential to win a national championship, given the fact that it's been reported he right now is the best passer in the room. And if he is, and if the offensive line pans out, which means that the rushing attack could be the best in the country, then you want a proven passer to have a complementary offense, an offense that can both kill you through the air. This is especially important as this is probably Ohio State's worst wide receiver room since 2020. The 2021, 2022, and 2023 receiver rooms are just more proven. And unless Jeremiah Smith has an absolute breakout season or Carnell Tate, which they could, not saying they won't, but unless they do, Emeka Egbuka is not the caliber of receiver that Marvin Harrison Jr. was. So it's very critical that quarterback is figured out this year. Last year, you had an ability to just kind of throw it up to Marvin Harrison Jr. or the underrated Cade Stover, and you could still have a semblance of an elite passing offense. I don't think you have that this season. At least it's not a known that it's a given that you can just heave it up there and one of the receivers will come down with it, or an awesome tight end. And Will Howard, Devin Brown, Lincoln Keenholz, we've seen all of them play in limited or wide capacity. None of those players are world beaters at quarterback. None of them are. Some of them have high potential and could be great quarterbacks this season, could be near elite. I don't know if any of them outside of Julian Sayin and maybe Devin Brown, if he makes a massive transformation, can be elite this season. But maybe I'm wrong. I look at this Ohio State team, and they should be superior at running the football this coming season. They'll have one of the best rushing attacks in football. They defensively could be number one, should be number one in terms of defense with what they return in both talent, with development, with coaching staff, and with the addition of Caleb Downs from Alabama. I mean, they have the best safety room in the country. Lathan Ransom, Jihad Carter, has another year of eligibility. He's coming back. And then Caleb Downs. That is a deep safety room. And don't forget about Malik Hartford as well, who was good as a true freshman last season. The offensive line, there are concerns there, but with how good the running back room is, I still think this rushing attack would be good, would be great, maybe, even if the offensive line was bad or just mediocre like it was last season. The bigger concern for the offensive line, I think, is in regards to protecting what will be a new starting quarterback. A starting quarterback that could, in the cases of anyone but Will Howard, be inexperienced. And in the case of Will Howard, you still want to protect him. He thankfully has legs, which gives him a greater ability to escape the pocket that McCord never had, but you want to protect your quarterback. You do. And at times last year, it was not just bad watching gap integrity on the O-line and opening up holes in the run offense, but in terms of pass block, it was sometimes rough to watch as well. Also, given that Josh Simmons is the most penalized offensive tackle in recent years. The offensive line has to improve, but defensively, this team is elite. They'll always be elite at wide receiver, and I think Day has made good staff moves and necessary changes. I didn't like the Perry Alano firing, but I think that had to do with recruiting. The Chip Kelly addition is great, and Ohio State, they hired a former Urban Meyer strength and conditioning assistant to go along with Mickey Marotti. And I think Mickey Marotti needs help in that department just because the injuries that have occurred over the previous few seasons, and also the trench play. The trench play just hasn't lived up to the standard, I guess that's all I'm trying to say. But I forget who's coming in, but it is a former Urban Meyer strength and conditioning assistant that Day is hiring to the Buckeyes. Let me know what his name is down in the comment section below. I almost feel shame that I'm blanking on his name. For Michigan, they're 128th in returning production and 5th in preseason SP Plus ratings. They lose the majority of their 2023 staff and starting roster to the NFL. The Wolverines do. Jim Harbaugh is gone. Sharon Moore's been promoted to head coach, so the offensive coordinator is now the head coach. Jesse Minter left to the Chargers with Jim Harbaugh. Strength and conditioning coach Ben Herbert, who built, I think, the #1 strength and conditioning program in the country. He is off to the NFL as well with the Chargers, with Jim Harbaugh. J.J. McCarthy going off to the NFL. Same with Blake Corum. Same with not Will Johnson, but Cornelius Johnson, with Roman Wilson. 6 offensive linemen. I can name them as Drake Nugent, Zach Zinder, Trevor Keegan, Carson Barnhart, Trente Jones, and Miles Hinton is coming back. There's one more offensive lineman that is leaving the program. I mean, it's crazy what Michigan has done at the offensive line position and how many NFL players that they have right now. Oh yeah, Ladarius Henderson as well. And every single one of those players on offense, A.J. Barner as well at tight end, and the offensive linemen, the receivers, quarterback, running back, all of them except for Trente Jones, according to ourlads.com, are projected to go in the top 5 or 6 rounds, with Roman Wilson being projected as a first or second rounder, likely second rounder. McCarthy is unanimously picked to be a first rounder. Corum and Zinner are going to be likely day 2 or early day 3 picks. And defensively, Chris Jenkins, Junior Colson, and Mikey Sainer still are projected to be day 2 picks, and Josh Wallace, Michael Barrett, Jalen Harrell, Cam Good, and Braden McGregor are expected to be day 3 picks. The defense and offense are losing a ton, and the culture that Jim Harbaugh has built is going to be tested this upcoming season. It will be shaky, and with a schedule that includes Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. Also Washington, who loses a lot, but they retain their elite strength and conditioning coach Ron McKeefrey. They have a top 10 portal class. Jed Fish is a mastermind who's actually familiar with Michigan, coaching there in 2015 and 16 under Jim Harbaugh. Washington played in the national championship last season against Michigan, losing to the Wolverines, but they do have good infrastructure, good resources, and I think they made a good hiring in Jed Fish. Jonathan Smith is one of the best staffs in the country at Michigan State, and part of me wonders if they can pull off a miracle in year one. It is a tough schedule. Ohio State's schedule is also tough, and we'll talk about those schedules more in a few minutes when we talk about the edges that both of these teams have over each other. But Michigan, they lose a ton. Again, 128th in returning production. They're 5th in SP Plus rankings because S&P Plus factors in past performances over the past, I think, anywhere from 2 to 3 years, past results, and also not just in terms of record and wins and losses, but on-field results like efficiency, points per game, snaps returning, recruiting rankings, all these different factors. They're 5th. They're behind Oregon. They're behind Ohio State and Georgia, obviously, and they're actually ahead of Alabama. Alabama is 6th in return in S&P Plus rankings. Michigan's also behind Texas. Michigan plays Texas and Oregon and Ohio State. They play 3 teams in the top 4 of preseason SP Plus. Thank you, Bill Connolly, for that information. And they could play Georgia, who's number 1 in SP Plus, if they go to the college football playoff and win a few games. For example, that would be absolutely crazy, a murderer's row of a schedule. And also on the schedule, like I was just talking about, Washington, who's top 30 in SP Plus, and that's about really where the murderer's row of a schedule ends. But still, Oregon, Texas, and Ohio State is tough, and Oregon and Ohio State right now are favored ahead of Michigan to win the conference. Michigan, elite trench play, most of the defensive line returns in Kenneth Grant, in Mason Graham, in Rayshon Benny. Those are 3 great defensive tackles, and also Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart. All the 2-deep returns, plus 1 starter, an elite NFL defensive tackle in Mason Graham, ergo most of the D-line returns. Not all of it, but most, which is surprising, and it should be the number 1 D-line in the country. The defense should be up there with Ohio State's. Ohio State has an edge in returning production, and they still recruit at a higher level, so you have to factor that in. But with Michigan having changes on the staff and in strength and conditioning, although it's just an internal promotion there, so at strength and conditioning in particular, Michigan should be close to the same, at least for this year and probably the year after that. It'll take time to tell whether these hires and promotions pay off or not. Ohio State has a reason to be viewed in a higher light than Michigan right now. Michigan is viewed as a team that will have to build back up to win it all. They're not viewed as just on the edge of winning a national championship. This isn't like Georgia entering 2022 or 2023, where you look at the Bulldogs and you say, oh yeah, they could win it all. If a few things go their way, if a ball or 2 balls bounce their way, they'll win it all again. Or if they just play to their potential, they'll dominate everyone and win it all again. That's not what's going on here with Michigan. Not one bit. Michigan is viewed as a team that will have to build back up. If Michigan plays to their ceiling right now, I'm telling you this as a Michigan fan, if every team, every team plays to their ceiling, Michigan's not beating Georgia. They're not. Last year, Michigan had the highest potential outside of, I thought maybe Washington could have a higher potential at points in the season, but that was proven wrong in the national championship game and also at other points in the season. Michigan had the highest ceiling. And heck, maybe someone will say Georgia did, but that defense looked vulnerable against Alabama, against Georgia Tech, against Auburn, and if Florida State had a full roster and they played Georgia at full strength in the Orange Bowl, that would have actually been a game. Would have been 63-3. But Michigan had the highest ceiling out of any college football team last year, and they won it all. They did. But they're not going to have the highest ceiling in college football again this year. I can next to guarantee that. Ohio State probably had college football's highest ceiling in 2019, and they didn't win it all. LSU did. Some will say that that opinion of mine is controversial, but people forget how elite that Ohio State defense and offense were. Again, they just lost a semifinal game to Clemson in a game where Ohio State was favored to win, and then LSU boat raced Clemson. I think that Ohio State's defense and offense would have provided a greater challenge to LSU that year. But they had enough depth and enough returning production and enough staff cohesion to say, hey, in 2020, we can be right back there. That'll be very challenging for Michigan to do. It will be hard, and odds makers say it's unlikely that Michigan will enter the game with an undefeated record. It's different for Ohio State, who has a similar strength of schedule. Some would argue the exact same or potentially even a tougher strength of schedule than Michigan. I know that Michigan plays Texas at home, but swap that out for Penn State on the road, and you have Ohio State's toughest schedule. They play Oregon on the road, Penn State on the road, and they host Michigan. That right there is a tough schedule. Michigan plays Ohio State on the road, but they host Texas and they host Oregon. That's a similar three-headed monster caliber of schedule for both of those teams. And Ohio State's win total is 10.5. Michigan's is 9.5. And many people in my comment sections have told me that they think, yes, that they think Michigan will hit the under there. I'm confident in Michigan's running back room, tight end room, and defensive line. They have elite depth there, elite players, and an elite ceiling. They have high potential at offensive line, at center, tackle, guard, and also safety and corner. And their team is aggressive. We saw this with Sharon Moore against Ohio State. We've seen this in other games with his play calling under Jim Harbaugh, where Michigan, for the past 3 seasons, has loved to go for it on fourth down, especially fourth and short. This team will be aggressive on the field and also off the field. Just look at how they hired Tony Alford away from Ohio State. But at quarterback and wide receiver, there are some deep concerns. In fact, I expect Michigan to go out and get a quarterback and a receiver, maybe more, maybe even 2 quarterbacks or 2 receivers in the portal. And they need depth. They could use depth at least at every position except for defensive line and running back. Those rooms are stacked. They could even use another tight end to help Colston Loveland, who was so young last year he couldn't even declare for the NFL draft. He's an All-American caliber tight end. But they could use someone like an A.J. Barner last year to make a great tight end duo. Awesome red zone threats. Michigan could use that. They could use a corner and a safety, as Rod Moore is injured and likely won't play in 2024, and Keon Sabb's departure to Alabama does leave some voids at safety. And at corner, with Josh Wallace and Mikey Sainer still gone, you have Will Johnson, who I think is the best corner in the nation, potentially the best defensive back in the nation, but you have Jair Hill and Jaden McBurrows, who are relatively inexperienced players. So Michigan and Ohio State, they're viewed on different playing fields right now. Both are viewed as great teams, I think, in the preseason, but Ohio State is viewed in that elite, near elite category, and they certainly have less questions than the Wolverines do. But overall, they're 2 top 10 teams, according to SP+. I share that opinion. In fact, I'll go bolder. I think they're 2 top 5 teams as of right now, although I would say that I do think Ohio State, from a power ranking standpoint, is better this year, unlike last year where I thought Michigan was the superior team on paper. So I expect the game to be competitive. Now, what is Ohio State's edge? Ohio State has the necessary talent to win it all. We have seen elite play on both offense and defense in the past from Ryan Day. Elite offense every year except last season, and even then there were glimpses of it. And elite defense in 2019 and 2023. So 2 out of the 5 years that Day has been the Buckeyes head coach. If they can combine the best of both worlds, like they did in 2019, and you saw glimpses of that in 2022, and I'd argue at times glimpses of that last season, they would be the nation's number 1 team. If you put the 2023 defense with the 2021 or 2022 offense, this team right now I would favor by over a touchdown to beat my national title favorite, Georgia. If you combined C.J. Stroud, an elite wide receiver core, the 2022 offensive line, which was very underrated with Luke Whippler at center, you give me Henderson, you give me Mayan Williams, Chip Trainum, the 2022 running back room, you give me Jeremy Rucker at tight end, and the 2023 defense. You combine the best of those 3 seasons, I'd pick Ohio State to beat Georgia, this year's Georgia, or Michigan by a touchdown at minimum, and more likely than not double digits. They'd be the nation's #1 team this year. I think this season is going to be a down year by college football standards. It will be like the 2021 season, where you will likely have one team, maybe 2, who are on a collision course, and while there will be a lot of upsets, including upsets of those collision course juggernaut teams, they will overall be out of the picture, and it will be very evident in terms of national championship odds. Maybe the 12-team playoff will provide more upsets, or more likely than not, it will just help the deeper teams have an easier time reach the national championship. Who knows? Ohio State's edge against Michigan overall is their backfield play. They have the better secondary, better cornerbacks, better safeties. I think Will Johnson is the best cornerback on both of their rosters, but Ohio State has depth there. Michigan really doesn't. And at safety, Caleb Downs is one of the best, if not the best safety in the Big Ten. In Michigan right now, without Rod Moore, they have questions at that position. At linebacker, I love Ohio State's talent there. I love the competition between C.J. Hicks and Sonny Styles. And with the experience that Cody Simon has, I'd give the edge to Ohio State at linebacker. And at receiver, obviously Ohio State. They return more at receiver, and they were better their last season. And at quarterback, I'd give it to Ohio State. Same with running back. I think there's a chance that Donovan Edwards, might be the best running back in the country this coming season. Even if that's true, the sheer depth that you have with Judkins and Henderson, who at worst are simply top 10 backs, makes that the #1 running back room in the country. Their backfield play and overall talent give them a sizable edge, not just a small edge, over the Wolverines. They also host Michigan this season. The game will be played in Columbus. What's Michigan's edge? Well, Michigan has won the Big Ten in 21, 22, and 23 because of their elite trench play and their game control. They're very good about not turning over the football, about using all the seconds on the play clock. They're very strategic. Last season, they used a bunch of eye candy and motions and shifts in plays and formations, and they worked defenses. I mean, Sharon Moore was an elite offensive coordinator, still is an elite offensive coordinator, and I think that he will be a great elite head coach at Michigan. And Minter was a genius on defense. They always had, in those 3 seasons, great game plans. For most of the time, they executed those game plans well, except for, TCU and Michigan in 22 and 2021, respectively. There's nothing Michigan could have done to beat Georgia in 2021, so I won't blame the staff for that loss. And they were physical. Michigan was the most physical team in the country this past year, and in 2022, they contended for that. And until they met Georgia in 2021, some people thought they were the most physical team that year as well. If the Wolverines can stick to their identity, and the staff pans out, and they use the portal, Michigan can win another national championship this year. It's a long shot, and people will call me insane for that. And no, I'm not saying it's the same odds as Ohio State. They aren't. But Michigan has enough depth. They have a good enough staff in theory, and they have enough key returning players to where if they use the portal, like Ohio State has, or even to a lesser degree, but still using it, to fill key positions, to add some depth, and they stick to their identity of game control, they minimize turnovers, and they get good to elite play out of every position, they can win another Big Ten national championship. They can. The Wolverines' edge against Ohio State is their trench play. I think Michigan has a better defensive line entering this season, And even though Ohio State only loses 1 offensive lineman and Michigan loses 6, given coaching, given past history, given the fact that Sharon Moore is still on staff and he's recruited much of that O-line, developed it, I'm sure he'll still have a little bit of a hand in that this spring, summer, fall, and for the rest of his time at Michigan. I also trust Grant Newsome as the offensive line coach. Tight end also plays a role in trench play with blocking. And I think there's a chance that Michigan is not just better on the defensive side of trench play, but also the offensive side of trench play entering this year. And whether that bodes true or not, I think as of now, it's safe to say that Michigan is tougher. They're straight up tougher than Ohio State is. And that is something that last year's game showed me in particular. You can say that the 2021 or 2022 wins were solely due to cheating. I would disagree with you, but cheating took place. I'm not going to be the Michigan fan who foolishly denies that. But Michigan in 21 and 22 just boat raced Ohio State, and I thought were straight up tougher. You want to say it's because of Stallions? Fine, I'll give you benefit of the doubt. And Michigan still ran for more yards, averaged more yards per carry. They suffered a greater injury during the game and yet bounced back in a more momentous way. All indicators that they were the tougher team. And I think that entering the game of this season, unless something jarring happens before then, I will stick to that. Ohio State now needs to prove that they are tougher than Michigan. I'm not going to give them benefit of the doubt there. I may give them the benefit of predicting them to beat Michigan, predicting that they obviously have a better wide receiver room than Michigan, that they're better overall in the offensive and defensive backfield. Heck, I might even give them benefit of the doubt in terms of their staff, that their staff is better than Michigan. I think Day obviously is a better head coach than Sharon Moore is right now. Maybe I'll even say Ohio State is a better football program. But in the area of toughness, you have to go with Michigan right now until proven otherwise, because they return just enough players and just enough of their staff and strength and conditioning, and they have that culture and identity that will remain this year and potentially for longer even after Jim Harbaugh is gone, that gives that aura of toughness. Overall, the game will once again be a top 5 matchup. Both teams can win. Both teams have edges over the other. I would lean Ohio State to win right now. I think that Knowles will adapt. I think the defense will be more aggressive than it was last year. Not too aggressive. It'll be more balanced. Michigan's offense will regress. I think the defense will regress as well. And it's in Columbus. And Ohio State's offense, that's an area where I don't know if it'll improve or not, but I think in terms of running the ball, I think they'll get better. So maybe overall they don't, but in terms of rushing the ball and with the offensive line returning in terms of physicality, I think they will improve. All of this looks like a shift in the direction of Ohio State in terms of who I would pick and who many would pick logically to win the game this year. I'm leaning toward the Buckeyes, but both teams have their own edge, their own unique abilities, their own reasons for why they can win. It'll, again, I think, though, be a top 5 matchup this season. Whether that means both teams are 11-0 or both teams are 10-1, those are probably the only 2 records that you could have for it to be a top 5 matchup. I think it'll be that. And the winner of the game will play in Indianapolis. Thank you all for watching this video. I knew it was very long. I knew it was going to be very long, but I think it's worth it. Thank you all for watching, and thanks to Crash2488 for being a Heisman Patreon member. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and SFS Inverter for being an all-conference Patreon member. And thanks to Will Loftus, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being an all-conference member. Again, you can subscribe to my Patreon via the link in the description or the pinned comment. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all around. Bye-bye.